I have a simple question. We've learned that the British trade negotiators throughout history, back into the 200 or 300 years ago, have always been extremely skilled. They're probably the best trade diplomats. They invented a lot of trade diplomacy. Is Brexit throwing away all the great gains that the UK, Maggie Thatcher with her iron fist and her big handbag slamming it on the table, has gained? Or am I seeing things too darkly there for the future of Britain?
Well, we don't know what Brexit means yet. So we, in a sense, can't say that Brexit is going to throw this away or throw that away. Brexit could be something that enlivens Britain and rejuvenates the British economy, but more likely it's going to be a pretty bloody business, really, and quite how difficult it is to achieve is going to depend very much on how we negotiate and deal with the rest of the world, on trade diplomacy, other diplomacy as well, I guess.
Before we get to the inside of the trade negotiations, which nobody can tell because it's like dealing with several imponderables, it strikes me that the Prime Minister, Theresa May now, when she was coming out of being appointed Prime Minister, she gave a very interesting interview right outside Downing Street number 10, I think it was, where she said in a big rupture with regard to Tory party politics that really what we need in this country, in the UK, she was referring to, is much more focus on productivity, doing more for the quote-unquote little people. She didn't quite put it this way, but she talked about putting finance in the box where London seems to have existed for making rich people richer and real estate more expensive for everybody else. And that seems, including it from a German perspective, it sounded almost like she was talking about more labor rights in the UK, and some people really were, especially in Germany, also quite happy about this because it seemed like she was trying to build a European economy, a turn European. Is she throwing all this away? Is it possible to have an economic reform agenda and deal with Brexit? Because what one has heard is, for example, also that the government needs probably 1,000 lawyers and hire them probably in China, India, and Singapore in order to get them. But in a bigger scheme of things, let us, not the Brexit details. Does her economic strategy make sense?
Well, the big part of her economic strategy is Brexit. What sort of Brexit is she going to have? And Brexit could come in a number of different shapes and sizes, and some of them might, at least relatively speaking, help people who are further down in the pile than the bankers in London. For instance, you might put a lot of effort into trying to get a financial passport for firms into Europe, for financial services firms into Europe, or you might put a lot of effort into getting good market access for manufacturing. Maybe you can get both of them, but quite likely, eventually, she's going to have to choose. And if she is really genuine in her desire to move away from an economy that just works for the elite towards an economy that works for everyone, then indeed you might think that she would be more inclined to favour manufacturing than financial services. But the financial services have got a lot of clout and a lot of influence. So the truth of the matter is this is not yet determined.
But what you're foreshadowing here would actually perhaps be an ideal way for everybody, because other nations, companies that have a lot of production facilities in the UK, face the nightmare of putting up paperwork for every input that they need to bring to the UK. General Motors announced that they've lost 400 million, and it won't be easy for German companies and so on. So it would be a revolution, what you're saying, to kind of be open, preserve the single market in some fashion for goods markets, but trade away finance for that. That would be a true British revolution in some sense.
It
right?
would be a revolution relative to the last 20 years, yeah, without a doubt. An awful lot of British policy has been designed towards creating an environment that's very conducive to financial services transactions. And so if it were the case that a conscious decision was made to say, no, we will put our effort into manufacturing or to perhaps some other service sectors, not into financial services, that would be truly revolutionary, yes.
When you compare the fascination in the government with Brexit and look at the economic needs of the country as a whole, I saw some figures that the government spends about 8 times as much on culture in the wider London region than anywhere else in the country, and that trickles down in many other areas. Is there a viable strategy to really rebalance the British economy? I think the government under Cameron has talked about that for a long time, but it's mostly been talk, and yet that's the most important thing, because I think the people outside of London are very unhappy in general.
Sure, you can rebalance the economy. The trick with Brexit is not to rebalance it downwards. You could have a Brexit that didn't suit anybody, and it hurt London more than it hurt the regions. I think that's a perfectly plausible possibility.
Spell that out for us for a minute.
Well, it means that you don't get the financial passport, financial firms move out of London, the London financial economy, of course, won't disappear, but becomes quite a lot weaker. At the same time, manufacturing struggles with some of the border regulations if we can't get keep in the customs union, or technical regulations if we can't stay in the single market, but it only suffers by 3% rather than 7%. You've rebalanced, but you've rebalanced downwards. Now, the ideal way of rebalancing is to rebalance upwards. And then you might say, well, perhaps we could have had all of this stuff by not having Brexit, and then thought seriously about how you do rebalance towards the regions in terms of infrastructure spending, focusing on education, and maybe even industrial strategy, although that is a slippery slope.
Let me pose a funny question to you. Let's assume you were quite a bit younger and were just starting your career.
Cheeky.
And you assume that Brexit isn't going to go so well. And you've read the statistics that Brexit was mostly voted for by older people, also because younger people didn't participate enough. Would you start about packing your suitcases because you don't feel like there's such a bright future in a country that all of a sudden tries to hit on Poles if in some occasions they weren't getting killed, even though the Poles are the only ones that helped British plumbing and finally made it come up to global standards and so on. But the serious question, I mean, there seems to be quite a bit of despair among young people being cut off from the continent, almost the reverse of that famous Times headline, fog over channel, continent cut off. But this is a very serious and existential question. How do you think it looks from the younger perspective?
I think it looks uncertain and with some serious downsides. Yes, if I were younger, I would certainly think, is this country doing what it can for me? Would some other country do better? I don't want to advocate that everyone should get up and leave. I'm British. I happen to respect and like a great deal about British society. But on the other hand, if you want to get net migration down, as the government apparently seems to want to do, driving young people away is a very simple way of achieving that numerical solution. You just get them to leave. So I think we have to be quite realistic. Exactly as you've seen on the continent of Europe, when youth unemployment has been so high, people have come to Britain and got jobs. If we're going to make the environment less friendly in Britain, we have to recognize that that flow first will reverse with people not coming in from the continent so much, and then the Brits more seriously coming out. I mean, let me add, the term the brain drain was invented by the Evening Standard in London in 1962 because we were so worried about the way that skilled people were leaving Britain. So it's not that Britain has always been a magnet. Britain has had in the last 50 or 60 years some very grim periods. The last 20 years have been unusual in the magnet that it's provided for young people.
So it's back to the future.
Can I raise something?
Sure.
I think Alan's being a little bit pessimistic. If, as I think will happen, the post-Brexit agreements make it much more difficult to have foreigners coming in, taking jobs in England. I go to coffee shops all the time in London. If I could speak Polish, I would be doing much better in buying coffee. There'll be a lot of jobs for young people in coffee shops as a result of the Brexit. They won't be very good jobs, but they will be employed at low wages.
And British productivity is going to slide further, which is the opposite of what
and
Mrs.
that
May has
assumes that
announced.
people can afford to buy the coffee in the first place. But I have to say, I was thinking more in terms of skills, skilled labour. But it is true that clearly there will be some jobs that just have to be done. And if we cannot attract young people from the continent of Europe, eventually the price will have to rise. Wages in those areas will rise. But there will be many things where, in fact, they're just not sustainable if the wage goes up a great deal. And it does presuppose that demand continues at its current huge enthusiasm for buying expensive coffee in London.
That intervention, by the way, was from Dan Hammermish, and his middle initial is tongue-in-cheek, in case anybody didn't quite. I want to ask you the last question for this round with you, and that is important for the people here, the citizens of Berlin, because you talked about young people, and for the first time that this city government, which is always in paralysis regardless of political composition, they were on the ball because as soon as Brexit came about, they started sending their economics minister saying, anybody who has a startup in London, come to Berlin, the conditions are great, the rents are much lower, you will work for something else than just paying rent. And is that the form of European integration that gets us ahead?
Berlin's a fabulous city. I really respect and like the way Berlin works and all the young people who are here. You may think it's unsporting to try and attract people from different bits of Europe that have had a bad time, but the British did it when President Hollande said, I'm going to raise tax rates to 70%. Our Prime Minister of the time said, roll out the red carpet, come over here, guys. We'll hardly tax you at all. All right, so it's integration and being part of a large market is quite substantially about competition. And if it's in competition about how you treat people, that's not necessarily a bad thing because it might end up with people being treated better. So I hope that not every person under 25 leaves Britain and comes to Berlin, but I certainly respect the notion of creating an environment that people want to come to.
Thank you very much, Alan.
Thank you.